It's worth remembering that the Cold War had its price. The economies of both superpowers were skewed towards arms spending, and the world is still feeling the after effects. But individuals too paid a price. In the race for arms superiority, chemical weapons were used on unsuspecting human guinea pigs. In the United States, not only did the Army conduct these experiments, they also filmed them. Tonight, we show that uncensored film for the very first time, despite the Pentagon's attempts to withdraw it. It's an exclusive look at how the U.S. Army targeted its own people long before the enemy could. It's the story of a bad trip to Edgewood.
I've served twice in Vietnam. I have never had anything that was so terrifying as that experience with the LSD. Never. I thought I was going crazy, but I didn't know what crazy was. It was that bad. I couldn't define crazy, but I knew that whatever this was, it was horrible.
"90 miles north of Washington, D.C., stands Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland. From World War I to the present day, it has been the center of the U.S. Army's research into chemical warfare. Within its laboratories, bizarre experiments took place. By giving a cat LSD, Edgewood Arsenal scientists could turn nature upside down. Animals were always tested before humans. Army scientists wanted to learn about the dose levels of nerve agents and chemical compounds, what would incapacitate and what would be lethal in an attack, and how their troops could defend themselves under attack. Goats were used as guinea pigs to test the efficiency of gas masks in a chemical explosion. But experiments were not confined to animals. James Ketchum, a retired Army psychiatrist. At Edgewood, his job was to ensure that the bright young soldiers recruited from Army bases across America were fit to be medical volunteers. Then, he gave them chemical agents and measured their performance.
I really don't think it would have been possible to develop this information without using human volunteers. You cannot generalize from the results in animals to the human. The human is generally much more sensitive to a given dose of a drug than any animal. And his ability to do so many things that animals can't do makes it impossible to predict the effects on that kind of behavior from animal work alone. They came around one day and called a formation, everybody get in a group. And they started asking about who would like to go to Maryland to test new gas mask, over-the-counter cough medicine stuff. And I was thinking about it, and I had been doing a lot of guard duty, KP duty, That was really sickening. Well, when they said 3-day pass every weekend, no guard duty, no KP, and all you had to do was this, I just snatched my hand in the air and volunteered,
from my understanding of their presentation, I would be testing riot control gear, stuff like tear gas, riot control gases, and equipment. And I had no idea that what actually happened to me would have been done to me while there.
Some guys stuck their head in a sealed, like a cubicle thing, and they sprayed gas in their face. Some guys was operating tanks and stuff, and they sprayed it a cloud. They had to drive through the things.
The testing of humans lasted from 1955 to 1975. 7,000 soldiers were used as guinea pigs. Half were tested with psychochemicals, mind-altering drugs like atropine, scopolamine, and BZ. But the GIs were never told what kind of drugs they were being given or what effect they would have.
When they came in to give me the injection, they told me they was going to give me this injection. I questioned it. What is this for? You know? Well, I said, what's in that? What's in it? I want to know what you're giving me. Don't ask questions. This is something that you're told to do. I said, well, what is this going to do to me? Because I was kind of apprehensive. I was getting scared at the time. I said, what are they giving me here? There's nothing wrong with me. I don't need any medication or anything. So, and I asked, well, what's the purpose of this injection? You know, never mind. Don't say nothing. Just do what you're told. Just lay there. That was all.
Several weeks later, on a windy, bitter, cold day, the same volunteer ran the course again. This time, he received a small dose of a chemical compound just before he started his run.
The chemical involved was PCP, better known today as the dangerous and illegal drug angel dust.
He felt compelled to disobey his instructions not to touch the platform when he jumped. Although his vision was not impaired, he found it difficult to focus his attention on the next objective. His physical actions were noticeably slower. His motor coordination was disrupted because of the compound's effect.
PCP gives the subject the delusion of unnatural strength.
How do you feel? I feel pretty good, sir.
Are you cold?
No, I'm not cold at all.
Are you tired?
No, I'm not tired. Well, I could run. Yes, sir. I could run. I run 100 miles right now.
Is that right?
That's
You're
right.
Pretty pepped up, huh?
Uh-huh. I run through it, and now I feel good. And I'm not good. And I'm not tired. And I can run through it again. You see what I mean?
Yeah. Did Sergeant Ditchkus give you any instructions about what you were supposed to do tomorrow?
Sergeant Discus? Yes. Let me see. What was I supposed to do tomorrow? Tomorrow? What, is today Thursday?
Today's Thursday, that's right.
Today's Thursday. Uh-huh. Well, tomorrow... wait a minute here.
You lost some buttons there.
I lost some buttons.
Thousands of volunteers received doses of a secret compound called BZ. A small dose would lead to complete stupor for 3 days, followed by loss of memory. The army wanted to see how quickly different doses could incapacitate their fittest and most intelligent soldiers. And between 1955 and 1967, Edgewood Arsenal was responsible for testing 740 soldiers and 900 civilians with one of the most powerful drugs known to man, the hallucinogen LSD.
People in my field were well aware that LSD was a potent drug, that it could cause deviant responses, that people could do dangerous things to themselves and others, act impetuously, and so forth. And so we had to think about that a great deal. I didn't want to do any studies with LSD until we had a secure environment. And when we had a secure environment, by which I mean a fully padded room, a nursing staff around the clock, and when we had developed screening to the point that we thought, identify individuals who were at risk for having a psychotic response to LSD, then we tentatively and cautiously began to give small doses.
2 hours later, the squad, all except the drill sergeant, now drugged with LSD, again was ordered to fall in. The response was not the same. Notice the volunteer who salutes several times. 5 minutes later, his severe depression caused the medical officers to end his participation in the test. But in marching, the drug squad, although starting fairly well, gave a sluggish and ragged performance. After a few minutes, the men found it difficult to obey orders, and soon the results were chaotic. There was much laughter as the group attempted to give expression to inner emotions. This elation was group supported, and an individual who was separated from the group would show severe disturbance.
Yeah. What's going on?
Volunteers were given doses of LSD between 3 and 10 times higher than the normal acid trip. Army records show in one case a man received a dose 100 times higher.
I laughed for seemed like hours on end. I laughed and laughed and laughed until I couldn't hold my sides any longer. My sides were sore from laughter.
It's like looking upwards and seeing spirals of glittering colors coming down, unwinding, vivid colors, different colors, colors that are really indescribable. I don't know, never seen colors like that.
Track 7 to 98, please. 90. 91. All right, continue. What will come next? What will come next?
I feel incapacitated.
Incapacitated, yeah. He's having a reaction that's a little different from the ordinary, where most of the effects are bodily sensations. And in fact, he made the comment, I feel incapacitated. I think he must have been reading the brochure or something in advance. But this was a librarian and a very intelligent guy, and it's interesting that he put most of the emphasis on the bodily symptoms.
Has your vision been affected?
Oh, yes, definitely.
How has it been affected?
I can't distinguish colors.
You can't distinguish colors? What color is this?
I had this terrific headache. The most terrific headache I've ever had in my life. Is like my head was going to split in half. And it lasted for hours. It just aching, splitting. And nothing seemed to matter but just getting rid of that headache at that particular time.
I can remember at the time thinking that somebody had a band of iron around my head and was just continuing to squeeze it, continuing to twist it in. It was, you know, as I say, the worst headache I've ever had.
Other subjects are more stoical, and although they are clearly bewildered and perplexed by what is going on inside their heads, they accept this without any particular outward show of distress.
Do you feel the effects of the agent?
Yes, I do.
Are they quite strong, would you say? Or
Miles?
I don't know, just like in two different worlds.
This was an interesting test. I remember this volunteer well. His name is Haitian, and he was a young soldier who took part in some of our LSD trials. This shows how LSD causes a type of confusion which is quite different from VZ. In other words, the individual knows where he is, he can still speak, he can answer questions, but so many thoughts are going through his head at the same time that he can't sort them out. He can't even do simple subtraction. 7 from 98.
Everything's moving.
I know it's difficult, but try it. 7 from 98 as well.
92.
92. All right, what's next then?
I don't know.
What comes after 92? Can you subtract 7 from 92? Try. Take 7 from 92.
7 from 92. God.
So one of the things that they stressed is they would say, does your foot or your arm feel like it's no longer part of your body? And they would ask these questions all the time. And you were in this padded room. There wasn't a doorknob, nothing. The light was recessed in the ceiling. And it was a scary situation because not knowing what I was going to feel, I went on quite a trip. I mean, the walls and inside the building were like blowing curtains in the wind, and they would ask me questions, and all the time, well, what do you see? Because I was dodging things and ducking, and the nurse would ask me, why are you doing this, or what do you see? And I would tell her.
We started to have hysteria because of the fly on the wall. Well, he started to be gigantic, and it scared me, actually, to where it, you didn't know what to do. He was frightened of it, but there was nothing you could do about it. It seemed like I couldn't move to defend myself or nothing because of the experience I was experiencing. It was really a bad situation, and I knew it at the time, but there's nothing I could do about it.
I was totally incapacitated. Totally incapacitated. I couldn't do nothing. I couldn't move anything. Everything was slowing down. I had no function of my body. I couldn't hardly write. They give me them, like I said, they give me them math problems again. I couldn't hardly write. I couldn't hold my arm up.
I started seeing giant spiders that appeared to be about 2 or 3 feet in size all over the walls. And I'm not normally scared of spiders, but I mean, the size just blew me away. I could not believe they were in there. And it frightened me that these things were so big, and there were so many of them in a little room. And I started seeing boils on my body and blisters.
And then they hooked up the electrocephalogram, and had all the little wires in my head with the little clay and whatever, and they were measuring, and they were asking. I was laying in this totally dark room on this bed with this strobe light over my head in the dark room, and this machine, I could hear this machine just grinding and running. And then they would ask you questions, and then when you would answer the question, they would want you to put your teeth together to short the machine out. So they would ask, that's when they would ask, does your hand or your feet feel like it's no longer part of your body? And then they would turn the strobe light on, and that thing would start flashing real slow, and then it would go faster and faster, and pretty soon all you would see is 2 giant pinwheels, just multicolored wheels on the ceiling going in opposite directions, and then the whole bed is floating.
I became really frightened because the instructor was holding something in his hand, and I could not understand what it was. I was told later it was a gas mask, but I thought it was the head of the battalion commander. I thought he was holding this thing up, and it was a battalion commander's head.
An Army doctor came in there and wanted to check me, and the reason I know he's an Army doctor, I saw his captain bars on his shoulder. And I kept wanting him to come over to the bed because I wanted to kill him. I never knew the individual. And I just begged him to come over to the bed. All I wanted to do was just kill him. So I reached over to grab the washpan to throw at him, and it's bolted down. Now, I really couldn't violent then, and I couldn't get the washpan to move, and I couldn't get the nightstand to move. Everything was bolted down.
You know Reaper! You know what day it is today, Cap?
Yeah.
What? What day of the week?
Wait a minute. Don't about me.
How come you still here?
Going back so far, so many faces, and basically, really, Carl, what day is it? I can't remember a thing. I can't remember. Come on, man. I don't want this stuff.
I could not control my mind. I could not think on anything. My mind was just like being out of my head. And I didn't have a mind. I lost all time. I didn't know if it was daylight or dark. Things started to get very, very bad. And I went back, started going back in time. I remember instances of just flashes of different things that I had done in my life. And all at once, everything was black. It was plumb black. I hear a gush of water, and I come out, actually reborn again. Is what I figured. When I come out the second time, this was terrible situation. But after I was being reborn, heard the water. I come out, I curled all up and crying, and things started gradually coming up, coming back. Slowly and slowly, but surely it was coming back. The drug is starting to wear off at this time, I think. And it took quite a while for that to happen.
I was afraid of dying. I was afraid of that this was it. There was something going to happen. I wasn't going to live through this. You know, it was real scary. That was the scariest part. And I don't remember how long it was like that. I don't remember waking up. I don't remember. I was ordered not to tell anybody about any of the procedures they used or what happened when I left there. They didn't tell me at first when I came. But when I was getting ready to leave, they ordered me not to tell anybody, don't divulge any information about what went on here, who was here, or what was going on. That's what I was told. I was under orders.
We didn't. We couldn't speak about it. We couldn't tell a doctor. We was told not to tell anyone, not to explain anything or to anyone at the time. So we didn't, you know.
The volunteers kept their secrets. They left the Army's testing centres with no warning about the after effects of the drugs and compounds they received. But for some, their trip to Edgewood was to have devastating consequences. February 1956. In the heart of New York, Operation Big City was underway. A Ford Mercury, specially adapted with a hidden exhaust pipe, pumped out bacteria onto the streets of Manhattan. Undercover agents entered the city's subway system. Their cases equipped with tiny motors which covertly disperse the bacteria Bacillus globuli. 10 years later, the Army returned. Light bulbs filled with bacteria were dropped in front of trains and down ventilation shafts to test how far the bacteria would spread through the subway system. For years, these public experiments were kept secret from the citizens of New York. The army faithfully filmed its own experiments. This Washington, D.C. bus station was the site of another secret test. 30 similar trials were conducted at public locations all across America. One of the earliest experiments had fatal consequences. In 1951, the army sprayed the bacteria Serratia marcescens over San Francisco. 11 hospital patients developed a mysterious infection, and within days, Edward Nevin died from an illness caused by the same bacteria. In 1953, CIA employee Frank Olson leapt through his bedroom window on the 10th floor of this New York hotel. 9 days earlier, a fellow CIA scientist had secretly spiked his drink with LSD. It took the government 22 years to acknowledge its role in Frank Olson's death. Another cover-up concerned the death of a civilian, Harold Blower. Suffering from depression, he was a patient at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. There, he and 5 other patients were unwittingly tested with mind-altering drugs by doctors who'd signed a secret contract with the US Army. Again, it was more than 20 years before his family discovered the truth.
In 1975, I was living in California with my 2 children. There was a knock on the door, and 2 people in uniform were at the door. They said they were from the Pentagon, and they wanted to talk to me about the death of my father. And I told them that my father had been dead a long time. They came in and they told me that they had found papers at the Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland. And these papers had information about my father's death.
It took Harold Blower's family 15 years of fighting the government in court before a judge's ruling established the facts.
On January 8, 1953, between 9:53 and 9:57 a.m., my father was injected with 450 milligrams, or 6.47 milligrams kilograms of body weight of EA1298. According to the drug study notes, at 9:57, my father became very restless and had to be restrained by the nurse. He began sweating profusely and flailing his arms wildly. At 10:01, he pulled up in bed, his body stiffened, his teeth clenched, and he began frothing at the mouth. Similar reactions continued for over an hour. My father was still talking and moving his legs randomly at 11:05. Finally, at about 1.5 hours after the injection had begun, my father lapsed into a coma. He was pronounced dead at 12:15 p.m.
What do you think when you read that?
I think they murdered him. They had a drug to test, and that's all they cared about. They didn't care whether he lived or died. All they wanted to know was the results of this particular drug. And they took his life. And they made him suffer. They made him suffer terribly, not only before the injection with his fear and his not wanting to have it, but his death must have been just awful. And there was no need for any of that.
There's no question but that he was a human guinea pig for the testing by the Army Chemical Corps. He did not know what the purpose of these was. He was never asked to participate, and he didn't give his consent to be a human guinea pig. The doctor who actually injected the chemical, the lethal injection, into Mr. Blower, when asked in 1975 by one of the Army Inspector Generals what this was, he said, and this came out during the course of the trial, he told the Inspector General under oath, he said, "We didn't know whether it was dog piss." And that's the shocking thing, that this doctor would inject this chemical into a patient of his without knowing what it was.
Belinda Blower and her sister finally won $750,000 in compensation. But they could not sue the doctors who had given their father the mescaline derivative drugs. Instead, the court awarded damages because of the negligent manner in which the US Army scientists had tested the drugs on mice before they were given to Harold Blower. As a result of the Olson and Blower scandals, the US Congress now focused on the stories emerging from Edgewood Arsenal.
Well, I believe the test.
One of the first to testify was Bill Jordan.
We were given about 150 micrograms of LSD-25 in distilled water. And within a period of about 20 minutes, the effects began to take place, principally initially nausea, vertigo, and then spatial disorientation and complete disintegration of everything around us.
The 1975 hearings led Congress to tighten the regulations governing human testing during medical research.
I think when concern was raised and problems seen with the testing program, that while it tried to look at the greater good, clearly did not do what many felt, and I agree, was the right thing for the individual, restrictions were put in place. I think individuals were used as test subjects without being fully aware of what they were doing, what they were being given. I think most volunteered, recognizing that they'd be involved in something, but I think they had a right, and certainly today have a right, to know exactly what it is that they're being exposed to and what the risks are, and that's what we try to provide.
Congress also demanded follow-up health checks on the Edgewood volunteers. But of the 3,500 men used in psychochemical experiments, only 220 were ever re-examined by doctors. The reports concluded that they faced no long-term physical risk. The surveys had given the Edgewood tests a clean bill of health. But the Army's own study revealed one disturbing and forgotten statistic. 24% of the volunteers re-examined had reported long-term adverse effects. Not physical, but psychological.
2 weeks after I left Edgewood is when the flashbacks started. And they have lasted now for 20 years. Until I finally got some medication to help me control it. It don't never stop in your mind, but the medications keep you from being terrified over it. And this is the way I've lived all these years. I thought I was going plumb crazy. And I was afraid of that too. I didn't know what to do, and I lived with it until I got out of service in 1959. I came home and tried to work. I could not hold work, could not hold a job. My mind just wouldn't function.
One day in particular, there in my unit, I had went to the arms room where we kept our weapons, withdrew my .45 caliber pistol, went into the barracks, totally disassembled it, and was having a class, beautiful class, except I was the only one there. The battalion executive also walked in and wanted to know what was going on, and I was giving a class. He just immediately walked out, and I realized that I was the only one there, and I reassembled the pistol and turned it back in.
Jim, why didn't you go and get some help from somebody? You must have thought something was going wrong. What was going through your mind, and why didn't you get any help?
I knew that I was having a problem, but in those days, in the early 50s, if I would have went to the Army doctors and said, "Doc, I have a problem. I go places and I can't get there. I see things that isn't there. I do things that's out of the ordinary for a human being. What is my problem?" He would have said, "You're crazy. You have a psycho problem. We don't need psycho problems in the Army. Goodbye." Then I would have been out the door with a wife and 5 or 6 children with no place to go. So I hid my problem. I cried in my own corner.
intended then to hold in any symptoms for fear that I really was losing it. And shortly thereafter, I had a grand mal seizure. And for the next 30 years, I was an epileptic. And I had grand mal and petit mal and psychomotor seizures. On tons of different medications, and nothing stopped them. I kept having them. And I was struggling at the same time to raise a family, to stay in the Army, and to keep my head on straight.
Well, I think probably more of them would have volunteered if they knew what was going to happen to them. A lot of them regarded this experience as a very interesting adventure. And in fact, we had a number of them volunteer to repeat the experience. We did do some studies where we gave the same drug on 2 occasions, say separated by a couple of weeks, or 2 different drugs. Some individuals received BZ once and then maybe a couple of weeks later might get a dose of LSD.
I've had diabetes, nervous breakdown, and I was a complete vegetable for almost like 2 years between 82 and 84. That had to be something that in the interim between the time that I went into the service and the time that I came out, that that changed me. I don't know whether it was the military itself or whether it was going to Edgewood. I can't say whether it was or not, but there was a change in me, in my total outlook on life and the way that I viewed my future.
My personality had just changed. My mother made numerous statements that I wasn't the same person I was prior to the test. Well, she didn't know what it was, but prior to my trip to Edgewood. And I went from being a pretty much passive person to being an aggressive person. I would lose a hair-trigger temper, and it would just be over piddly things. I mean, you and I might be sitting here talking, and just all of a sudden, one word would come out wrong, or something, a child might drop something, I'd just lose my temper, and just literally, I've thrown plates, I've put my wife through a wall, through the sheetrock wall when I've lost my temper, and thank God she wasn't hurt. But we were sitting there talking, and the next thing I lost my temper, and I reached, and I wanted to just have her quiet, and I grabbed her by her shoulders and went back with her, and she went through the sheetrock on the wall. And it scared the life out of me. And I've had violent episodes with my children, with my wife, and with people I work with. And it's over little things, nothing significant. Because of the secrecy involved that we were told from Edgewood Arsenal not to discuss, my wife didn't know about this until 1980. And this was a period of 7 years of our married life that she had no knowledge of what was going on with me. It was just a total loss to her why I would become violent and break into rages, and whenever I'd have a seizure, she couldn't understand why. It makes me sad because I've lost a lot of my family. My closeness with my family, my brothers, my mother till she died, it was more of a, I'll see you once a year, and I can't see you any more than that because I don't know what's going to happen to me. And with my daughters and my wife, I can't get close to them like I want to. I can't hold my daughter and hug her. I can't tell her I love her. Something inside has just changed. It's just eating at me, and it's torn at them.
You have to ask, what else could be a cause of this feeling of going crazy? What else could be a cause of these problems that develop years later? How logical is it that a psychological experience or even a pharmacological experience years ago would suddenly pop up later and cause one to go nuts? It doesn't make sense to me, and I haven't seen any systematic demonstration of this fact.
For a long time after Edgewood, I had weird dreams about somebody coming in and taking me and doing, strange experiments and all kinds of stuff with it. I would say at least 5-6 years afterwards, I was still having the same dreams about, just being physically unable to do anything about the situation.
If they had told somebody, said, hey, we'll use this individual for LSD, he may be a little flaky now and then. He may lose his bearings. But cuddle him, take him to the medical people and talk to him, counseling. But, just don't throw him into the ditch and, let him go. Because it was so hard on my family. When I got back, they didn't understand what was going on. My parents didn't understand. Even my close friends, they didn't understand. They figured, he's gone. He's really, really out of it, What's wrong with him? Did he get hit in the head? Did he got shell shocked? But if they had just told somebody, and patted me on the head and said, boy, you did a good job, but now you're a little sick.
The people were not informed. They were not fully informed of what the hazards were, what the dangers were, how unstable LSD was, and how each individual can have separate reactions to the same dosage. And of course that there was no follow-up. It was like, hey, no big deal. Just trot along on your way.
We did not warn volunteers that they were likely to have flashbacks or suicidal ideation or any of the number of bad things that can happen to people, whether they're correctly or incorrectly attributed to having LSD on one occasion. The reason we did not is the same reason that doctors don't advise patients of the likelihood of having something when there's a less than 1% chance of its occurring.
After 24 hours rest, the completely recovered volunteers reviewed their experience.
What was this business over here in the corner? You were lying down and looking at the wall? Well, I didn't think it was good psychology to say to these volunteers, by the way, you may have a terrible flashback sometime in the next year or two, or you may feel like committing suicide or jumping off a high building. I don't think many doctors would plant that thought in the head of a patient or a volunteer.
No one ever told me from Edgewood that there would be any after effects or anything from the testing that was done there.
What do you think about that now, looking back on it?
I feel very disappointed that my country would do something like that to me and not inform me of potential dangers. It tugs at my patriotism.
They had no follow-up on it. No doctor saw me. And like I say, for over 20-some years, they just wouldn't tell me what they give us so we could be treated for it. I had to sue the government to find out what drugs they give me. And when I got into the lawsuit, they finally admitted that they did give me an overdose of LSD.
But Calvin Sweet received no damages because the government has immunity from being sued by its own servicemen. James Stanley also sought damages and lost. Dissenting Supreme Court judges compared the Edgewood tests to the Nazi experiments of World War II.
I never did receive any apology from any government official, in either by word of mouth, by telephone, or by written letter. Nothing. They didn't say, "Thank you, Jim Stanley. You did a good job. You poor stupid individual. We used you. Now we're finished with you." We didn't. They didn't thank me at all. Not one thank you. You know, even an old shoe, you know, when you throw it aside, you know, you say, "God, you was a good old shoe. I hate to throw you away." But not Jim Stanley. Not the rest of the individuals that took that test. They didn't say thank you at all.
James Stanley was once the youngest Master Sergeant in the U.S. Army. He spent the last 3 years fighting to have a private claims bill approved by Congress. If he succeeds this year, many more guinea pigs will come forward to claim compensation for the long nightmare of their trip to Edgewood.
I don't respect my government the way I should. I don't respect the people that are supposed to run it. I don't respect the Army. I gave 7 years of my life on active duty, then went to the National Guard for 7 more years. I gave 14 years of my life to this Army. I could have been killed in Vietnam, but I was killed here by Edgewood Arsenal. As far as my family, as far as me, I was killed here. I don't have a heart because of it, because I can't touch my kids. And I can't tell my wife what I feel. I would say that people aren't to be guinea pigs. People have brains, they have emotions, they have feelings. These things aren't to be experimented with people. You can't take a man's mind from him. You can't take his emotions from him. You just can't take these things from a human being. And that's what they did. They just alienated ourselves, our mind, I guess, from our bodies. They wanted to control our minds or see what they could do to our minds, and then just left us. And most of us that I've seen are shells of what we were. We want to be what we were, not what we are.
Subtract 7 from 101.
James Stanley is now pursuing his private claims bill for compensation through Congress. The appropriate congressional committee will view our film and doubtless draw their own conclusions as to how useful any of those experiments at Edgewood turned out to be.